Om Sthapakaya cha dharmasya sarvadharmaswarupine avatar varisthaya Ramakrishnaya te namaha. Shruti smriti purananam alayam karunalayam namami bhagavat padam Shankaram lokashankaram. We are continuing the discussion on the topic, the four pillars of Advaita philosophy, Advaita tradition. Since this is going to be the last in this series of lectures, I want to deal with some of the very common misconceptions about Vedanta in general, specifically Advaita Vedanta. As I mentioned at the very beginning, the central thesis of Advaita Vedanta is enshrined, summarized in a small pithy statement, in the form of a statement. Brahma Satyam Jagad Mithya Jivo Brahmaiva Napara. This line contains the four fundamental principles of Advaita Vedanta. Brahman is the only absolute, eternal, unchanging reality. This world is only a relative entity in the sense that it keeps changing all the time. It is within time, but Brahman is beyond time. This world and everything else is within time. Now, the most important, the cardinal principle of Vedanta is Brahma Satyam. Brahman is the only absolute reality. We already explained this in the earlier sessions. The only absolute reality in the sense that remains the same in the past, present and future. It is beyond definitions, words and verbalizations. It is something that we experience as the divine reality present in all of us, which is the basis, the essence of the entire existence. Everything else belongs to time in the sense everything else exists but doesn't exist the same way in the past, present and future. So in that sense, it is called Mithya. And our real identity is that we are Brahman. If you look upon yourself beyond this body-mind complex, then you find within all of us there is the divine spark, which is the essence of the ideal of universal spiritual humanism. It is so universal, it is so all-encompassing, all-accommodating. The whole existence is one spiritual family. We cannot hurt anyone without ultimately hurting ourselves. This is the basis of universal ethical philosophy. And Brahma Satyam Jagad Mithya Jiva Brahmaiva Naparaha, and Jiva is not anything distinct and different from Brahman. This is the essence of Vedanta. Now, as I mentioned earlier, it is not only a philosophical, a metaphysical system, it is also a very deep and profound ideal of universal spiritual humanism. That's why the original exponent of Vedanta as a philosophical system, Shankaracharya, who lived in the 8th century AD, he makes a statement in one of his commentaries on an earlier Advaita text, Mandukya Kariga, Gaudapada Kariga is another name, because it was composed by a great pre-Shankarite Advaita philosopher called Gaudapada. So Siddhanta Vyavasthasu Dvaitino Nischida Dridham Parasparam Viruddhyante Taihi Ayamna Viruddhyate. What it means is, any ideal of spirituality or religion which makes a distinction between God and His creation. It's kind of dualistic philosophy. There is a possibility for conflict and there is a possibility for mutual misunderstanding and disharmony. But Advaita, which tells you that your true identity is that you are the same divine reality. In the sense, not that you are God, but the divine spirit is within you. If you live an ideal life, if we follow certain fundamental ethical, moral principles, spiritual principles, if we live in a way that we don't look upon anybody else as a stranger, if we look upon the whole creation as one spiritual family, then we will have no quarrel with anyone. Because we not just believe in, but we experience the presence of the divine within everything and everywhere. That's why Shankaracharya says, Yada suhasta padadibhi means Asmadiyoyam vaidigo dharma na viruddhyate. That is, this Vedanta has no quarrel with anyone. Advaita has no quarrel with anyone. Because it says Atma Ananyatva, the same Atman is present in everyone, in everything. Atman is not distinct or different. So there is no otherness in the ultimate sense. This is the universality, the humanistic aspect, the spiritual aspect of Vedanta. In fact, this Vedanta philosophy can be a strong foundation for every kind of interfaith dialogues, interspirituality, and a perfect harmony between different religious traditions, even perfect harmony between those who believe in God and those who do not believe in God, because Advaita Vedanta accepts the right of the non-believers to not believe in God. By not believing in a creator God, they do not become atheists, they do not become non-believers, they do not become bad. They also have in their essence this divine spark, the presence of the divine. So Advaita Vedanta accommodates even non-believers. But then again there is a common misunderstanding. That is very common. And one of the problems, one of the reasons why this misunderstanding frequently happens is that, we in Vedantic tradition, there have been some great authors, great philosophers. There were great Vedantins, Advaita Vedantins who lived even before Shankaracharya, because the ideal of Advaita begins with Rigveda itself. Indra Mitram Varunam Agnirahu Adho Divyasa Suparno Garutman Ekam Sat Vipra Bagudha Vadandi Agnim Yamam Matarishwanamahu. It comes in the Rigveda Samhita, the earliest document of religious, philosophical, spiritual ideas known to humanity. It comes in the first mandala, 164th Sukta of Rigveda Samhita, which actually is inscribed in front of our temple, which is built as a symbol of interfaith harmony, interspirituality, spiritual universalism. Now, there have been scholars, thinkers, interpreters in Vedantic tradition, but the most prominent and the most significant philosopher, saint who comes in the line of Advaita, in what you call Parampara, in the succession of teachers of Advaita, is Shankaracharya, who lived in the 8th century AD. And the latest and the most prominent and the great teacher who introduced this Vedanta philosophy of Shankaracharya to modern Western world was the great Swami Vivekananda, who lived in 19th century, means he was born in 1863 and passed away in 1902. He was the one who brought this Vedanta to Western world. Now, in this long line of succession, there were being great teachers. And when we try to understand Advaita in its true spirit, we should always study the teachings of those great teachers of ancient times. Frequently, many translations are misleading. And sometimes people do not believe, they refuse to believe in the teachings of the great teachers. Now look at science or engineering or medicine. If you want to go to school and study physics, you cannot neglect the teachings of Newton and Einstein. You cannot say that they lived in early days. Einstein belonged to 19th century and Newton belonged even earlier. So we want something new in modern 21st century. 21st century physics is a continuation of the succession of teachers who could be compared to the saints and philosophers of Vedanta tradition. The great physicists, the great scientists, it could be Newton, it could be Darwin, it could be Einstein, Max Planck, anybody in modern times, 20th century. So you cannot neglect the teachings of this great succession of teachers and proclaim that I am following my own physics. Now the great problem in modern times is there being many great teachers, not only in the Western world but also in India, who refuse to accept the authenticity of the great early teachers of Vedanta. But you cannot, as I mentioned, you cannot do that in science. You cannot do that in technology. You may improve, you may expand the horizon of science and technology by making new experiments, new research in modern times. But you cannot totally neglect, you cannot completely ignore the teachings of the great scientists of early days or even modern 20th century. You can't do that. But people sometimes take liberty in by completely ignoring the teachings of the early Vedantins. That's why Vedanta is often misunderstood in modern times. So you find Advaita Vedanta is sometimes wrongly interpreted as a life negating, as a reality negating, as a life denying ideal of asceticism, or just as a dry philosophical construct. And there have been teachers, there have been scholars, even in 20th century in India, who were not necessarily monks, but who were freelance thinkers, intellectual, they preached some kind of intellectual anarchy, who preached Indian philosophy or Vedanta as some kind of an empty, life-negating philosophical construct. Almost, their teachings share border with atheism or agnosticism. But in reality, the great Advaita ideal preached and taught and expounded by Shankaracharya was an all-accommodating blend of realism and idealism. It was not just an idealistic construct, but it was a harmonious blending of idealism and realism. It was a blending of devotion, rituals, karma yoga, ethics, morality, and everything. That's why the greatest devotional poet of Hindu tradition was also Shankaracharya, who was the original exponent of Vedanta, who expounded Vedanta philosophy as a compact philosophical system. Though the Vedanta ideal existed before Shankara, it was Shankaracharya who built a compact edifice of metaphysical system by writing commentaries not only on the Upanishads, but also in on the Brahma Sutras and of course the Bhagavad Gita, which is in many ways a predominantly devotional text as well as a text on Karma Yoga and also on philosophy, Jnana Yoga. And not only that, this Shankaracharya also wrote the most exquisite, moving devotional poetry. No less than 65 devotional poems are attributed to Shankaracharya. And he was the one who built temples, installed temples, founded 10 monastic orders, founded monasteries, installed his disciples in different monasteries as the abbots. And not only that, he also evolved a distinct system of puja or worship. So it's called Shanmadacharya. He established this ideal of 6 types of theistic devotional tradition. Shaivam cha Vaishnavam Shaktam Sauram Vainayakam Tatha Skandam cha Bhakti Margasya Darshanani Shadevahi. So the Shaiva tradition, worship of Shiva, the worship of Vishnu, the worship of Devi, Shakti, the worship of sun, which has somewhat become obsolete these days, and Vainayakam, the worship of Ganapati, and the worship of Subramanya Skandam. So all these temples, all these different forms of worshipping a Saguna Sakara, a God with form and attributes, was also the work of this great Shankaracharya, who was again the exponent of Advaita Vedanta, the most important name in the succession of the great Advaita teachers. And not only that, the same Advaita philosopher, I'm just trying to make this point because there is a gross misunderstanding. The Shankaracharya denied God, denied or ignored or did not pay proper attention to rituals and puja and worship. The same Shankaracharya was the one who established this Panchadevata Puja Paddhati, the method of worshipping 5 deities, for centuries since Shankaracharya's times. It was the usual common practice of Hindu householders to do puja, to worship 5 deities. Adityambigam Vishnum Gananatham Maheshwaram Panchayajna Varo Nityam Grihastha Pancha Pujayet. Every householder should perform this Panchayajna. It is not Pancha Mahayajna, it is called Panchayajna. 5 types of worship. He should worship Aditya, that is the sun god, then the Divine Mother, Ambika, Vishnu, then Ganapati, and also Shiva. So, all these devotional traditions were coordinated into the form of a devotional practice to be followed by every householder. And this was the work of Shankaracharya. So you find in the Vedic literature there are any number of gods and goddesses mentioned, dozens. He coordinated all this and developed this unique form of worshipping. So you have to begin your spiritual life in the primary school or the kindergarten. That's where you study your alphabet. Like that, our spiritual worship actually begins when we see something sacred, something great and grand and beautiful, something transcendental. And our first concept of the transcendental is a great human dimension. It's called anthropomorphism. We want to look upon God as the totality, as the essence of all that is good, great, and beautiful. That is the natural human instinct, to conceive of God as the totality of all that is beautiful and great and grand. So that has a place in Vedanta. Vedanta doesn't deny that. But one should not stop there. Just as one should not stop his or her education with the kindergarten or the primary school. As we evolve in our spiritual life, praying, meditation, going to churches, temples, synagogues, other places of worship, Buddhist temples, anywhere, and we start performing certain rituals every day or every week, that's perfectly fine. But as we evolve further in our spiritual life, as we evolve in our spiritual evolution, we reach a point where we start feeling the presence of the divine even outside the place of worship. We are able to connect our mind with God, with the divine, even when we are not within the temple, even when we are not within the church. We feel the presence of the divine everywhere. You find in the Christian mystical tradition, the great mystics, they could feel the presence of Jesus, not just inside the church, but also outside the church. So you find, Shankaracharya says that when you evolve to the next stage of your spiritual evolution, you start feeling the presence of God, the divine spirit, everywhere in everything. It has a place. But as we evolve further, we realize that in reality, the highest concept of God is not just the totality of all that we desire, that we cherish. It is the sum total of everything. God is, as we evolve further, we feel God is one divine reality, divine principle, divine spirit, which cannot be defined or explained, which at the end of the day can only be experienced as our own real being. And when we realize that, we feel the presence of the same divine, not only within ourselves, but also in others, everywhere. And that's what is called a universal spiritual humanism, which is the essence of Vedanta. Now, in this philosophical structure, as I mentioned earlier, the most difficult aspect of Vedanta is to understand the real meaning of the second preposition of the Vedantic ideal. Brahma Satyam, we already explained. Jagad Mithya, how do you reconcile in reality the teaching, the idea that this world is a delusion, this world is just a relative entity? Now, it may look a bit too academic and too philosophical, but that's precisely the problem I'm going to address today. Jagad Mithya, this should be understood properly. The first thing to understand is, Mithya doesn't mean absolute non-entity, absolute non-existence. Those who are under the wrong notion that Vedanta or Advaita Vedanta teaches that this world is unreal, totally unreal, absolutely unreal. This world doesn't exist. That's what Vedanta teaches. In fact, this is a very common misunderstanding. All over the world, this is a common misunderstanding. I had to share platforms with people who used to ridicule on a few occasions, saying that Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta, to be more explicit, teaches us that this world is not real, this world doesn't exist, the chairs in front of me do not exist, etc. In fact, this was the view not of Vedanta, this was the view originally expounded by a school of Buddhists called Vijnanavadins or Yogacara philosophers, Asanga, Vasubandhu and others, Dignaga and others. Now, in the Buddhist tradition, in the later phase of development of Buddhist philosophy, 4 distinct schools of philosophy evolved into Mahayana Buddhism. Shunyavada, Vijnanavada, also called Yogacara. These two schools belong to the idealistic tradition. Then Sautrantika and Vaibhashika from Hinayana tradition, which believed in the reality of external objects, which did not deny, rather which actually accepted the reality of objective phenomena, objective world. Now, when Shankaracharya was writing his books, he was teaching, when he was preaching in India, the Yogacara school or Vijnanavada school was very predominant. It could be roughly compared to some kind of subjective idealism, because they believed that external things have no real existence. It comes and goes. Everything depends upon our mental construct. Everything is our mental construct. You see external objects because you have those vrittis, we have the impressions in your mental system called Vijnana, or Alaya Vijnana. It's called Alaya Vijnana is the repository of Vijnanas, these impressions, these ideas. So they believe that external objects have no real existence. Now Shankaracharya actually refutes this view, saying that external objects are not totally unreal. They do have an existence, they do have a reality, but they do not have an absolute reality because they keep changing. In fact, there is a sutra in the Brahma Sutras, this is Na Bhava Upalabdhehi. So the sutra, in this sutra, Shankaracharya says, in this bhashya on this sutra, he establishes that external things are not totally non-existent. This sutra has a background because during Shankaracharya's time, Dignaga, Vasubandhu, Dharmapala, they were some of the great teachers, and Vasubandhu in his well-known book Vimshatika stated Vijnapti matram evaidat asad arthabhava avahasana yatha taimirigasya asad keshadi darshanam. This is what it means is, everything is Vijnapti matram, everything is a mental construct. It's all the objective phenomena constitute just different mental constructs, mental ideas. They exist only in our mind. They exist only because we feel like perceiving them. Asat, it is unreal. Arthavabhasana yatha taimirigasya asat keshadi darshanam. Just as people affected by jaundice, they may feel many things. They may look at the moon and they may see that the moon has got this color of jaundice, yellow. It may look yellowish. So because of the problem of perception, we see different things. These things that we see do not have an objective reality. Vijnana skandhamatram tu yujyade vana yujyade swapnadrishtandar buddhaiva vyavaharatha. And not only that, they argue that things that we see in waking state are just like things that we see in dreams. Abadha swapna vaishamyam bahyarthastu bahirvad iti te abhyukti adadhi artharupa bhag. So the subject was whether external things are real or not real. The Vijnanavadins, Buddhist idealists argue that they are not real. Example is dream objects which do not exist, really speaking. We understand that when we wake up, dream objects are not there. Then Shankaracharya says, no, external things that we see in waking state and things that we see in dream are not identical, not similar. In waking state, we see different objective things in the world, the objective phenomena, the sky, the mountain, the valleys, all these we see in waking state. They are not totally unreal. Then Bhashyakara says, he actually establishes this point in that sutra, na bhavaha upalabdhehe, means things, external things have no non-existence. They are existent, they are not non-existent. Na bhavaha. Why? Because we see them, we know about these things when we see them, when we connect with them. So external objects are not non-existent because they are known. So actually, Advaita argues that external things are real, but they are not absolutely real, because to qualify for the status of absolute reality, they should be unchanging. And because everything in the external world keeps changing, they are not absolutely real, but we see them, we experience them, we interact with the external objects, so they are not absolutely unreal. They are not absolutely real because they keep changing. They are not absolutely unreal because we see them, we experience them. Then Shankaracharya, he says, Ubalabhyadehi pradipratayam bahyarthastambha kutyam ghada patayidi cha ubalabhyamana seva bhavo bhavidamarhadi yathahi kaschit bhunjano bhujisadhyayam trupto swayam anubhuyamanayam eva evam bruyat aham na bhunje navatupyami iti. It's a very powerful statement. Shankaracharya says that you cannot say that what we experience, the external world, is unreal. You are hungry, you have food, you have lunch. You cannot say, I was not hungry, I did not eat food. You can't say. Now, why I'm putting this forward is the idea of Jagad Mithyatvam, the Advaitic idea of the so-called illusoriness of the world is frequently misunderstood. Practically, even in some of the academic institutions in India, you can find this terrible misunderstanding happening in the academic circles. Mostly because many of them do not care to read the original text or do not study these texts from traditional teachers. As I mentioned earlier, when you want to study physics properly, you should study from a well-known physicist who has studied physics from another well-known professor of physics, who should have studied from another source. That's how any area of knowledge becomes authentic. That principle applies to Vedanta as well. So if Vedanta is not properly understood, there is every risk, there is every possibility of it being misconstrued or misinterpreted as some kind of agnosticism, and at worst even as some kind of atheism or some kind of just armchair dialectics or armchair philosophical system. So the real meaning of Advaita teaching, that this world is unreal, should be understood properly. Vedanta doesn't say it is totally unreal. No, this world is not totally unreal. This world is there and it exists. We live in this world. But as part of our spiritual evolution, and this happens to many people, highly cultured, refined, well-educated thinkers, not even necessarily philosophers, but even people with a mature intellect and mental refinement, cultural refinement, sometimes will tell you, this is the way of the world. This world changes. You need not worry. That's the nature of the world. What does it mean? All that you see in your everyday life, that you see in the world, should not be taken seriously, should not be taken as the sum total of everything. Change is part of life in this world. So world also changes. This common sense which every refined person will get as he grows, as he evolves in cultural, intellectual refinement, was stated to be Mithyatvam, with the idea of Mithyatvam by Shankaracharya. So I shall try to go through this discussion further. I shall try to refer to some of the classical definitions of Mithyatvam, means the falsity, the unreality of the world. Unreality, not in the sense it is totally unreal, but unreality in the sense it is only relatively real. It is not absolutely real. That is the status of unreality of the world. That's what the real implication is. So, to begin with, we should know, in Vedantic tradition, there are 5 definitions of Mithyatvam. Mithyatvam is a word, we cannot really replace it with any appropriate, satisfactory translation. So I'm using the word Mithyatvam instead of using a translation. Roughly, you can translate Mithyatvam as falsity, something that appears to be real, but as you investigate further, then you understand it is actually not real. If it is totally unreal, then there will be no discussion at all. You would not experience it at all. So the classic example is the rope and snake. And please remember, this rope and snake metaphor, analogy, is not limited to Vedanta. It is, of course, it originated in some of the books, some of the works written in India in the 5th century BC. That's roughly almost 13 centuries, 12 or 13 centuries before Shankaracharya. And it is also found in some of the Greek metaphysical works, this rope and snake analogy. Maybe it must have traveled to ancient Greece from India in the 4th or 3rd BC, because there was close interaction at the intellectual level, philosophical level, close interactions between ancient India and ancient Greece, right from 6th century or maybe 7th century BC, and it continued till about 4th or 5th century AD. Now, Mithyatvam is the word. So the classic example is rope and snake analogy. In a room which is not fully lighted, it is not fully lit, semi-dark room, there is a piece of rope lying on the floor. You mistake the rope because there is not enough light, so you may mistake the rope for a snake. Of course, 3 other options are given in Vedanta. You may mistake the rope for a crack on the floor. You may mistake the rope for a curved stick. You may mistake the rope for a water line. Jaladhara, Danda, Bhuchidra and Sarpa. These are the 4 vikalpas, 4 misunderstandings that could happen. And now the sub-problem is, when you mistake the rope for a snake in the semi-dark room, you can't say that the snake is totally unreal. When you bring light, you immediately understand that it is not snake, it is a rope. But the snake is not totally unreal. Like saying, there is a garden in the sky, small children walking in the street, sometimes the evening, late evening, with brilliant sunlight. It's maybe 6 o'clock in the evening. Small little babies looking at the sky may exclaim to their parents, oh, there is a garden flower garden up in the sky. It's childish imagination. It's absolutely unreal. It's called Akasha Kusumam. That is the technical word in Vedantic tradition. It is absolutely inconceivable, absolutely unreal, unthinkable. But the snake idea that you superimposed upon the rope is not absolutely inconceivable, because there is a snake in the forest or in the zoo that you have seen, and keeping that in your mind as a memory, you superimpose that snake idea on the rope because you can't see clearly, there is not enough light in the room, and there is something that very closely resembles a snake lying on the floor, so you mistake the rope for a snake. So it's not totally unrealistic, because the snake is there, not in the room but in the forest, maybe in the zoo, and you have seen it in the past. That memory is superimposed, which is called adhyasa, which is called smriti rupa in Vedantic tradition. So that is the status of the world. As you observe further and further, as you try to understand further and further, then you understand the world changes. If you look at the history of the cosmos for the last several hundreds of thousands of years, this cosmos didn't remain the same for hundreds of thousands of years. It changed so many times. In fact, every tens of thousands of years, there is so much of dramatic change. The geological level, the universe changes. Every moment, the cell changes. So, in our body, so the first definition is Mithya means anirvachaniya. Anirvachaniya means beyond description, beyond definition. Sadasatta anadhikaranaturupam mithyatvam. This is one definition, but it means is indescribability. It cannot be described because it keeps changing. So it is not absolutely real, because if you want to call anything absolutely real, it should remain the same without any change in the past, present and future. It should be seen the same in the waking state, in dream state and deep sleep state. Because it's all in everything should be avasthatraya abadita, means not affected by the changes in the triple states of consciousness, like waking, dream and deep sleep states. So what it says, it is anirvachaniya or indescribable. Sadasatta anadhikaranaturupam mithyatvam. So that means anything to be called sattvam, paramartha vastu, absolute reality, should be abhaditatvam, means it never gets cancelled. What you see, it should remain the same. As I mentioned, there is nothing in the world which doesn't change. So when it changes, then its previous state, its previous status gets cancelled, and you find it is different now. So the previous state is it's gone, and so the previous condition gets cancelled. Now the absolute reality should be of the nature of never ever getting cancelled. It should remain the same in the past, present and future, in the waking, dream and deep sleep states. But this world, it keeps changing. So it is not absolutely real, it is not absolutely unreal. So it is beyond description, because describing means it is this or that. You cannot say this world is absolutely real or absolutely unreal. It is neither absolutely real nor absolutely unreal. Therefore, it is anirvachaniya. That is one definition of mithyatvam. For those of you who are interested, you should remember this was the definition given by Padmapada Acharya, who was a disciple of Shankaracharya, who wrote a commentary. It's called Panchapatika on Brahma Sutras, on some parts of Brahma Sutras. So this comes in the well-known text written almost during Shankaracharya's own time by his own disciple, whose name was Padmapada or Padmapada Acharya. This is the first definition of Mithyatvam. Means indescribable or indescribability, non-definability. The second definition of Mithyatvam, that means why the world is conceived to be neither real nor unreal. I mean, how it is eventually proved to be false, in the sense not absolutely real. The second definition comes in a book written by a later philosopher. His name was Prakashatmayati. He wrote the well-known book, it's called Panchapadhiga Vivarana. And according to him, Mithyatvam is multiplicity. The Mithyatvam is eternally negated in Brahman. So, Pratipannobadhu Traigalika Nisheda Pradiyogitvam va Mithyatvam. So that's the idea behind. And his Pramana Vakya from Upanishad is Neha Nanasti Kinchana. What it says is that the world of multiplicity is eternally neglected in Brahman, which is the locus of his appearance, and as if the world is false. So what it means is, the snake did not exist on the rope before you came to know that it was not a snake. Even when you mistook the rope for a snake, it was not a snake. And before you mistook, it was not a snake, and when you mistake, it is not a snake. Even after the misunderstanding is gone, then also it won't be a snake. So, Pradipannobadhu Traigalika Nisheda Pradiyogitvam va Mithyatvam. If you make a number of clay pots, clay glasses, number of utensils from clay or mud, you have in front of you a number of golden ornaments or maybe clay pots. Any of these examples will be accurate. When you look at a clay pot, clay cup, anything made of clay or mud, when you see that, you may think, well, it is something distinct and different from clay. But actually, when the clay pot is sitting in front of you, it is only clay. Before it was turned into a clay pot by a pot maker, by a professional worker, it was clay. And after you break it, again it goes back to clay. A golden ornament, before the goldsmith made that golden ornament, it was gold. When you wear it on your neck, then also the necklace is gold. When you melt it, it goes back to gold. So, golden ornament is only a kind of, is an association of a form and therefore a name, Nama Rupa. So, this is the essence of the second definition. So, the world, when you see the world as distinct from Brahman, as a separate entity, you are totally mistaken. When you see the world after dissociating name and form, then this world is nothing but Brahman. So, an elevated soul may be living in this world, but he will still feel the presence of Brahman, and he feels the world as non-distinct from Brahman. That's why Brahma Satyam Jagad Mithya at the level of philosophy, Brahma Satyam Jagad Satyam at the level of experience. Because when you reach that level of experience, there is no world to be negated. So that is second definition. The third definition is Jnana Nivrityatvam va Mithyatvam. This also by Prakashatmayati in his well-known book, that is Panchapadhiga Vivarana. Prakashatmayati is the exponent of Vivarana Prasthana, a distinct philosophical movement in Vedanta during the post-Shankarite times. What it means is that it gets cancelled by jnana. When you get knowledge, you immediately dissociate name and form from the world, and then this mithyatvam is gone. Something which is removed by correct knowledge is false. Something which gets cancelled when you get correct knowledge is false. That is the third definition. And its pramanavakya is vidwan namarupa vimuktaha. That is also an important definition. The fourth definition is, it was given by another great philosopher who appeared during post-Shankarite times. His name was Shankaracharya, who wrote a well-known book called Tattwamayananda. It's also called Chitsukhi. In that book, he defines mithyatvam as swasyanistha atyanta bhava prayogitvam va mithyatvam, which was modified by Madhusudana Saraswati, who actually takes up all these definitions and defends and expounds these definitions, and he refutes the criticisms leveled against these definitions by the Advaita philosophers like Vyasatirtha and those who came before him. So Madhusudana modifies this definition. So atyanta bhave adhigarane eva pritimanatvam va mithyatvam. So, in fact, Chitsukacharya himself says, Sarvesham abhibhavanam swasayatena sammade pradayogittam atyanta bhavam pradimrishatmada. So, this is the fourth definition of mithyatvam. That means what it says is this: mithyatvam consists in being absolutely negated in the very locus in which it appears. That means you mistake the rope for the rope for the snake, and later when you bring light into the room, then you understand it is only a rope. So the snake idea is negated on the very entity in which you perceived as a wrong notion before you brought light. So the sarpatva buddhi is negated in the rajju itself. This is the fourth definition. The fifth definition is also very important, and that is called sadviviktatvam va mithyatvam. That means mithyatvam consists in being different from the real. That is, this changing world, this changing external phenomenal world, it is distinct and different from Brahman. Because when we use the word world, Jagat, it means Nama and Rupa, and Brahman is devoid of Nama and Rupa. So this is the definition that you find in Ananda Bodhachari Nyaya Deepavali. So these definitions are important only in one sense. They are a bit academic, maybe dialectical in its language structure, but it's very important to remember that Vedanta does not say that this world is totally unreal. Vedanta does not say that Advaita is a life-negating, reality-negating, a totally unrealistic system of philosophy. Vedanta is an all-accommodating and integral philosophy. It's just like a huge university which also includes a kindergarten, a primary school, a junior college, and also a research facility. So we think of a university which also has got a kindergarten, where if you are a small little child, you can join in the kindergarten. And gradually you can graduate into primary school, junior college, and eventually you can join the university, and you can get a PhD, and you can become a postdoctoral fellow. You can even become the president or the dean of the university in course of time. So Advaita system is an all-accommodating an integral system of spiritual life and spiritual philosophy. As a philosophical system, it is the last word in Vedic philosophical tradition. As a spiritual way of life, it is the last stage in our spiritual evolution. It accepts, it accommodates all ideas of gods and goddesses, all conceivable ideas of all different traditions, because it tells you that nobody is wrong, everybody is right. But you have to evolve further. If a child is going to kindergarten, you don't tell him, you should not go to kindergarten, should go to university. A child is perfectly right and justified in going to the kindergarten, because that's where he begins his education. So also later he may go to primary school, he may go to junior college, and eventually to the university. So that's why Vivekananda in modern times said, we are not traveling from error to truth, we are traveling from truth that's lower to truth that's higher. Lower in the sense, we are evolving from one stage to another stage. The previous stage is not wrong, but it is something that we should transcend and go beyond. And when you reach the last stage in your spiritual evolution, then Advaita Anubhuti. That means the experience of oneness and unity and oneness of existence. On this fundamental basis, the fundamental doctrine, that there is the divine present in everything, there is a divine present everywhere. When we feel this, when we reach this level of experience, then we feel the presence of the divine in whatever we do, whatever we speak, and we'll be able to live in this world, looking upon the whole existence as an expression of the divine. It is the highest moral and ethical philosophy, a philosophy that helps us to practice spiritual kinship with the whole creation, not only human beings, but the entire creation. Thank you. Namaskar. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Rama Krishna Arpanamastu.